Morning, everyone. Welcome to the seminar series. Today, I'm very excited to present Tabea Scheel, who is a professor for work and organizational psychology at the Europa-Universitaet of Flensburg in Germany. And on top of that, she also works as a coach and a business consultant. She's an Alexander von Humboldt alumni, has published in numerous international peer-reviewed journals like the Human Resource Management, and she's also written a book about humor at work. For more than a decade, she has been investigating the role of humor styles in the work context. And she's lived in Berlin for most of her life, raised 3 daughters, and has never been to Africa. Not yet. Today, Prof. Scheel will be talking to us about humor at work, how humor serves many ambiguous functions in the work context and may impact attitudes, well-being, relationships, and the performance of employees as well as leaders. For instance, she contends that humorous culture in healthcare organizations relates to a better working climate, and laughing with colleagues in retail centers is associated with mental well-being. However, she points out that in extreme situations, leaders' humor may be perceived as detrimental. So in this talk today, she will present preliminary evidence for the effects of humor trainings, and the discussion of these studies will include methodological shortcomings of humor research and promising avenues for future investigations. So Prof. Scheel, please go ahead and begin your presentation. Thank you so much.
Hey everybody, thanks for joining for this seminar, and thanks for the introduction, Jenna. I will try to concentrate on the screen for a second. Yeah, Jenna basically told you already everything I want to talk about. I'm very glad that you are introducing or including a organizational psychologist perspective in this seminar, because this is slightly different to what you usually hear in the seminar. It's more quantitative psychological perspectives. Or subtitle, Who's Afraid of Statistics? Though please don't leave, because I try to get rid of all the numbers in the PowerPoint so that you can follow. Or at least I wouldn't have to explain so much. Of course, humor at work is not totally different to humor not at work. Nevertheless, I want to give you a short introduction about the approaches to humor at work, about functions and findings, some ideas or some preliminary findings for interventions, and of course a conclusion. Studying what is humor at work. Of course, as I said, it's like everyday use of humor, just with a different context, so maybe also with different consequences. Humor in work context is as multidimensional and ambiguous as in other places of your life. Several researchers tried to come up with a definition, like in all other areas of humor research. So the key would be non-serious social incongruity. The focus on social means in the work context, you have social relationships, of course. Humor is supposed to be any event shared by an agent, in this case as employees, with another individual target like customers, leaders, top managers, or your colleagues, that is intended to be amusing to the target and that the target perceives as an intentional act. We, with a colleague of mine, Christine Gockel, that's the one I wrote the book with about humor at work, we were discussing and trying to come up with a really good definition for humor at work. We only have a preliminary type of kind of work in progress definition. So when we talk about humor, we usually mean communicative processes that include incongruence as a key for humor and evoke a variety of emotions, not only mirth, as we all know, either in the producer of humor, the receiver of humor, but luckily sometimes in both. So this is, just mirroring the complex phenomenon. I want to introduce a specific perspective on the everyday use of humor in work life. And I don't know whether you're familiar with the two-dimensional approach by Martin et al. He was introducing the 4 humor styles, the way people use humor in their lives. And most of the humor, a majority of the humor research in at work context is using this two-dimensional approach. So there are two positive and two negative types. They're, of course, in quotation marks because this is too easy. And you can direct the humor at yourself or at others. So on the positive and self-directed side, there is self-enhancing humor, or you could also say it's kind of coping humor, where you try to laugh about your mistakes or the misfortunes in your life. There was impressive evidence for concentration camp research when people were able to find some humorous perspective in this really devastating situation of their life, they mentally survived better afterwards. So self-enhancing humor has positive consequences. Affiliative humor is also a positive style. That means the humor you share with your colleagues, with everyone else in the group. You make fun, you have shared jokes, and it's not at the expense of others. On the negative side, there's self-defeating humor. That means you put yourself down with humor. This may have negative consequences because it's related to lower self-esteem, and it's especially risky if you have a low status. Aggressive humor, we all know aggressive humor, that's at the expense of others and is usually used to feel yourself superior. In total, studies in work context also show that the positive styles are rather a chance or have positive consequences, and the negative ones are at least risky in work contexts, like in other contexts too. Having said that, I want to move on, and this is probably more repetition. We are also using the usual humor theories in our research. Very briefly, in Congruity Theory, I think Andrea introduced all these theories at the very first session of the seminar. So there is the enjoyment of something which clashes with your expectations. In our studies, of course, this is something related to the workplace. Then there's superiority theory, like the disparagement of others to feel yourself superior. This is also found, of course, in workplaces where you have, for example, status differences. The incongruity theory is trying to explain why something is curious, and the superiority theory is trying to explain why you use it, so for which the functions are. Then there's a third, big theory stream. These are the arousal theories. There's the idea that humor and laughing has kind of a physiological stress relief function, like you have an arousal boost while you're laughing, and afterwards you are even more relaxed, like with an arousal jack. There's actually mixed evidence, so it's not really that the evidence is supporting this part of the theory. And there's another theory I think is especially important for work context, the reversal theory by Apter. The idea is that all of us, and not only in the work context, are changing their states several times during a day. A telic state means you are serious, concentrated, goal-oriented, and a paratelic state means that you are flexible, open-minded, and in a rather playful state. And the idea is that humor is perceived as enjoyable if you're in a paratelic state, but in the telic state, you don't really like humor because it creates fears, misunderstandings, or it's just annoying for you. I will show you one of the findings regarding this theory later. So this was just a brief capture of our approaches from organizational psychology to humor at work. And of course, this is just basic humor theory stuff, just applied for the work context. Coming to the functions and findings, this will be a mixture of very general findings and some empirical and anecdotal evidence from research. In the work context, humor is a social lubricant or abrasive. That means it can bring people together and make social life at work really enjoyable, or it can even mean that one bad joke can ruin a very good relationship in a minute. So it can also be a very dysfunctional approach. We differ between an interpersonal and intrapersonal perspective, and I come to the interpersonal or social side of the functions right now. So on the interpersonal side, humor is shown to improve immediacy of the teacher or trainer, for example. So if you have trainings in the work context, that makes teachers and trainers more approachable. And of course, humor is used for attention in a variety of contexts. Just think of marketing purposes, for example, but also in the work context. Right before Corona, I was sitting in an airplane. Everyone was falling asleep because the safety instructions were going to be coming. And then the flight attendant started with, there are 50 ways to leave your lover. Everyone was awake because this is, of course, interesting news. But then he went on with, and just 8 out of this airplane. And you can guess that he had the attention, and it was probably the first safety instructions people were really listening to. Why is emotional contagion important in the work context? If the idea is if you're working in a team or with colleagues or even with your leader, and you are kind of in the same mood, work is easier because you have shared understanding, you have shared emotions, and it's easier to cooperate. So humor can help to foster emotional contagion, and this usually means the positive sides or adaptive sides of humor. And it can also create cohesion in your team if you, of course, are not using humor at the expense of a team member. There's much evidence for this. Status and power is very interesting. So on the one side, you have usually people higher in status, like leaders, who are allowed to use humor and who initiate humor and who are even allowed to make the same bad joke every day, and everyone is supposed to laugh about it unless they already quit. So that's one side. You can foster status and power with humor. You can, on the other side, either make yourself more approachable if you use self-deprecating humor, or there's also not much research, but much needed research about the subversive powers of humor in the workplace. If you make fun of your leader, like we know from the jokes about dictators, they don't like it, but you can, because you question their status. So in leadership research, this is the focus of humor at work. Face saving, rather than criticizing someone, or rather than coming straight forward with, you go to your boss and say, hey, I really need a company car, you just put it, haha, and then I take your company car, haha. And then you can always say, oh, it was just a joke, you know? So you can use it for negotiations, for placing some wishes that you wouldn't do straightforward. And there's a very funny or very nice experiment. The Confederate said to the participant of the experiment, and then I'll throw in my pet frog while negotiating. So when using humor in that kind, the participant was much more willing to give more to the Confederate than when the Confederate didn't throw in his or her pet frog. So very tiny experiment, but with a huge outcome, actually. Well, pet frogs. Norm enforcement, very, very important. Maybe you know this from educating your child. Rather than criticizing someone, it can be helpful to make a humorous comment, mild aggressive humor, not targeted at the person, but at the behavior. And then you can foster something like socialization at the workplace. If you have new team members, for example, and I don't know, they start piling up their dirty coffee cups on their table, coffee cups on their table. And rather than telling them that they really have a messy table, you can just call out a dirty cup competition for 1 week or something. So you can use this in team and leadership. So this was just a rough overview. There are several studies about all these functions of humor at work. And coming to the intrapersonal side, this is the coping function of humor, the self-enhancing humor style usually. Humor helps to change your perspective. It can create distance to a problem in yourself. So it's a very fruitful coping strategy, though it doesn't apply to all situations. And it's also said to buffer stress experiences. Like if you have high job demands, like time pressure, I'll give you an example later. Humor is said to minimize the consequences for your mental health, for example. So this was quite a dense overview of functions of humor at work, and I'm coming to a very impressive example for now. In a hardware store in Berlin, what you see here is the terrarium. What you also see here are two buns or rolls laying on hay. And if you take a closer look, then it reads Sibirical spring roll. Yeah, it's German, Tundricus sibiriensis, and you could buy it for €17.50. This is like 20 times as much as a roll would cost in Germany. And so I was standing in this hardware store in Berlin. I was asking myself, what did they do? What was the purpose? And I just came up with the idea that they probably just had fun. So either the top management was aware of this organizational humor and let them do this, or they all already quit and didn't have anything to lose. And then, of course, afterwards, I tried to find out where Siberian spring rolls live, and they live in Siberia. And there's a nice, actually German video, very professionally made, but totally hilarious about the surroundings and living conditions of spring rolls. This is an example for shared team humor that's really manifest, as you can see. And in a very related situation or with a related intention, one of the students approached me after he heard something about humor at work and said, well, he's working in a hardware store. And he was asking himself whether laughing with colleagues during breaks would actually buffer the stressful circumstances of their work. So we went out and did a study. Don't worry, I will lead you through this. And we asked in 4 big retail stores, we asked the employees, how often do you laugh with your colleagues during breaks? And then you see on the x-axis, they could answer from very seldom or never to very often. We also asked them about their state of irritation. And you see on the right side, there is a blue and greenish blue explanation for affective and cognitive irritation for the chart. Affective irritation covers states of nervousness, being grumpy, also you don't want it, and really being tense and nervous. And cognitive irritation is the rumination about work, the rumination about work even after work, so you can't detach and you think about work even at home. So this is cognitive irritation. And we know that irritation is a precondition actually for depression and burnout. So it's really a relevant state. What you see in this chart here is going from the right to the left, from the left to the right side in this chart. You can see that the more often people laugh with your colleagues during breaks, the less they are irritated. And it's very significant, or it's significant for affective irritation. The more laughing means being less nervous. And it's somehow a trend, at least, for cognitive irritation. So laughing with colleagues during breaks seems to help against irritation. But you probably would ask that later, but I can tell you now, it's cross-sectional, means we asked at once. It could also be, and it's quite plausible, people who are more irritated laugh less. So this needs to be actually investigated in the future. But what we then asked ourselves, okay, the idea is that humor is buffering. How can we test that? And we also asked for time pressure. And what we found is the more time pressure people experience, the more they are irritated. So time pressure fosters irritation. And on the next slide, you see the moderation by humor, which was really supporting these buffer hypothesis. And what you see here is low in time, high pressure and affective irritation. And if you look at the straight line, this is low break laughter. People who are low or less often laughing in breaks have, the more time pressure they have, more irritation. And what you see in the dotted line is people who laugh frequently in breaks, they have time pressure, but independent of their time pressure, they have low irritation. That, of course, doesn't mean just give them time pressure. As long as they can laugh, they can deal with it. But it means that humor can really buffer maybe like extreme situations, well, not extreme, but maybe like dense and job demanding situations. So this is a support for the buffering hypothesis of humor. As another example, not on the personal, but on the organizational level of research, there was this contest, Great Place to Work. And this contest was conducted several years ago. There were companies participating in this contest, and they, for this 1 year, they put in humor questions to also include humor for health organizations. So they were in healthcare. Just briefly reading the questions we asked, or the agreement we wanted for the following statements. We have a friendly atmosphere, we have fun at work. In our organization, humor helps us to deal with difficult situations. The employees often use humor for reassuring or supporting each other. In our organization, one does not laugh at each other in case of mistakes, but one laughs with each other. And the leaders have a good sense of humor. What you also see is that the red lines are the organizations finally winning the awards, and the black line is the organizations not winning the award, but taking part in the competition. And then they also had a so-called representative sample, although I think it's not representative, but it was a large sample of 3,000 organizations just across in Germany, across branches. And these are the yellow, the light blue lines. Maybe the main finding here is more agreement to the humor statements by the winning organizations, and they were winning in several sections, not only humor. So the findings rather say that humor relates to better organizational climate in these distinguished employers. There was a higher instrumental benefit of humor for these distinguished employers in comparison to the other two employers samples, and that distinguished employers leave more room for humor. So this is an interesting sample, because usually organizations are not too eager to really let you in and ask for humor on this large scale. So this were some examples for team in healthcare. I will provide you with a rather comprehensive work right now, and there will come up some numbers actually. This is a meta-analysis about humor at work, and it is only about positive humor styles, because negative humor styles are only included recently, also because organizations don't like it if you assess it. So 49 studies, and it was just self-assessment cross-sectional of employees. And what did they ask for? They asked the employees for their own humor and for the leader's humor. They also ask for the employees, this is the right side, the health outcomes, work-related outcomes, and leader effectiveness. And what they found is, these are numbers for those of you who finally want to see some numbers. This is just the average correlations. This is kind of a methodological approach in a meta-analysis. If you would see a 1.0, that would be a total correlation. And what you see here is like moderate correlations. If you see a minus in front of it, it's a negative correlation, and it would read like this. Employees having a higher self-assessment of positive humor report less burnout, less stress, better health, better coping effectiveness, better performance, better job satisfaction, less work withdrawal, and more group cohesion. This is just for the assessment of the employee's humor. And for the leader's humor, they only asked for the relationship of work-related outcomes and leader effectiveness, and they found even higher relations for some of these constructs. So the assessment of the leader's humor as perceived by the employee relates to better performance, self-assessed performance, way more job satisfaction, less work withdrawal, and more group cohesion. And also the leaders were judged as more effective, especially the performance of the leader and the approval the persons gave these leaders. So humor seems to have, well, consequences that are really relevant and really also for organizations translate into money, of course. This is always the perspective of organizations, actually. And this is getting even more important as the health conditions of employees are not really enhancing recently. I will give you an overview about findings of leader humor in the organization and also another example now. So humor and leadership, as humor always has, it's a double-edged sword. It's a tool in order to get things done. So a very instrumental approach in most of the research. There are several effects on the followers. They are more on the social emotional side than the performance variables. So it's not like you use humor and your employees are just producing more. It's more on the soft side. So they use it to reduce the loss of face or end or start conflicts for solidarity and so on, and all the functions I already introduced to you. And there are very many, and these are just some findings about the positive side of humor, affiliative humor, sense of humor, or self-enhancing humor, and so on. They're related to better health, better performance, better satisfaction of the followers, less social distance in work contexts, and more interaction. And then also leaders who use positive humor are attributed to be more efficient, more intelligent, more friendly, and it's seen as an appropriate behavior to have positive humor. On the aggressive humor side, there's evidence for higher physiological and mental stress in followers, so it really does something to people. And it creates a higher social distance, something you usually don't want in workplaces. Self-defeating humor is interesting. If self-defeating humor is used by leaders who have a higher status, it can reduce the status difference. It means that leaders seem more approachable. As a side note, if you're a woman, you have to think about it because you have a higher status as a leader, but also if you use humor in the work context, they will probably assign you less competence as compared to men. There's a construct of leadership that's called transformational leadership. That's it's an approach of leadership where you care for your employees, where you try to give them a vision and make their goals to your goals and so on. So if you use self-defeating humor in this transformational leadership style, it's especially effective. Then, of course, I talked about extreme situations already a little. There was another PhD student coming saying, well, I'm doing research in firefighting. What do you say about humor in firefighting? Does it have a place there? And then we discussed this, and the importance is that they have they have everyday work life, they do maintenance and admin, and they sit around and wait for being called and so on. And then they also have, they are called when things happen, of course, and there's an incident. In the first phase, things are very chaotic. They try to find out, okay, what's burning, what's going on, how many persons do we need, and then they start going there. They don't know what they expect, so it's really not under their control. And afterwards, when they're, I don't know, started to taking out the fire or something, and no, there's no person in this house, or we already secured some and so on, then there's a more stable phase where you have control. And in the chaotic phase, the assumption was they're in a telic state and humor is interfering. And that's really a situation where you shouldn't use humor as a leader. And in the stable phase, you can use humor because the situation is under control. And I just give you the brief without numbers. This is a paper we wrote about this. It was 2 vignette studies with firefighters, and what we basically found was that in the chaotic phase, where you have no control over the situation, the absence of humor and leadership is really helping the frontline communication clarity, because we know humor is causing misunderstandings, something you really don't want in a chaotic situation. And also, the firefighters said that they want to be taken serious because they risk their life and they don't want anyone to laugh about this or make fun of the very serious situation. And this all translated into higher effectiveness of the communication, and it sounds quite intuitive, but nevertheless, it's a first study showing a situation where you finally really shouldn't use humor. So extreme situations, look out what the conditions are and maybe not use humor. So this was a overview of functions of humor and why humor is good and in which situations humor may not be good, I want to briefly introduce two intervention studies and two approaches to intervention, and these are just a start. And like pretty much for everything I said today, more research is needed because of methodological flaws and because of limited research, basically. The first one is, of course, was conducted, was a field study conducted in work context, but wasn't really a very work-related question. The question was, can hospital clowns help children against anxiety when facing surgery? So on the left side here, starting with that, it was a pediatric surgery, 30 children and their parents took place. On the x-axis, you see that we had 3 points in time where we asked for the anxiety of the children, sometimes the parents, sometimes the children themselves. You see the black line, this is the intervention group who at the second point in time were in front of the surgery. The clowns accompanied them, and after the clowns left and before they went in the operation room, they also were asked for the anxiety. And T3, the third point in time, with when they left the hospital. So it was kind of a follow-up. If you just look at the control group, you see what you expect. Anxiety not really high when they entered the room, the hospital. Then when they were just confronted with surgery, anxiety was rising. And then when they left, anxiety was low. In the intervention group, for some reasons, random reasons, because children were randomly assigned, they had higher anxiety from the start for whatever reasons. But when they were experiencing the clowns, the anxiety was lower. Also, they were just to go into the operation room. And in the end, that was lower again. So it's statistically significant that the intervention group had a reduction in anxiety just prior to surgery, which is really nice. What is really nice about the study is that we didn't just ask for a self-assessment of anxiety, but we also took salivary samples. They had to chew on cotton wool. And we were measuring the level of oxytocin, which was really, well, demanding to do. Oxytocin is a hormone, it's a bonding hormone. It means you feel well, you feel connected, to put it very briefly. You see no significant difference in the control group between the first and the second point in time, but you see that in the clown's intervention right before surgery, the oxytocin was even rising due to the clowns. And this was one of the few studies where you have a combined mental and physiological evidence. And right now we are conducting research. We just started a very huge research project for clowns going into elderly care units. And the good thing is that also in these organizations, the approach is to foster the organizational culture. That means that employees, nurses, but also people working in the administration and the landlord and everyone can take part in humor seminars with the intention to raise their awareness for humor and maybe increase their humorous potential. So this is very interesting, and I show you a similar study we conducted in the last years. It will be my last presentation of the finding, actually, right here, at least. These were 2-day humor trainings with the German Institute for Humor. It really exists, and I know it sounds like an oxymoron, but they really do humor trainings. They are trying to raise the attitude against humor, or improve the attitude against humor in the work context, and they have applied training techniques like exaggerations, paradoxes, paradoxical interventions, and so on. We had 24 trainings over quite some years. 70% were women. There were around 40 years. And what we did, as a side note, the control group is still in progress. So the analysis is going on. So I would just provide you with the intervention group's results. We asked them two weeks prior to the training. We asked them directly after the training. And we had a follow-up 3 months later, which was really nice. And I will just show you some charts with results. This first chart is about the self-assessed means of humor styles and of using humor. And what you see here is the styles I introduced before: affiliative, self-enhancing, self-defeating, and aggressive humor, and also some measures about using humor. Wherever you see these red bracket and the stars is a significant difference, but I will just briefly talk you through this. Affiliative humor was higher after the training and even 3 months later compared to before the training. Self-enhancing humor was higher after the training and also at follow-up. Self-defeating humor was also rising, maybe just because they were using humor more often at all. And aggressive humor was after the training, it was rising, which is interesting, but could be that the relationships in the group were enhanced for the 2 days. And if relationships are good, you can use aggressive humor. And it was declining for the use in work contexts afterwards. And the overall use of humor was also enhanced. So it helps and it works. So people really can get help with using their humor. And then we also asked about several other things very briefly. What we found interesting is we asked for self-compassion also at the 3 points in time. Self-compassion means that you are non-judgmental with yourself and you are not really angry at yourself when you make mistakes, and you see your own mistakes as part of human nature and so on. And you can see that the self-compassion was enhanced after the training and even more after follow-up. The idea was using more humor and have a more humorous perspective on life fosters self-compassion. We also saw an increase in occupational self-efficacy. That means that you are sure that whatever happens in your work life, you kind of can deal with it. And then there were several beliefs against using humor, like either you're born with humor or not, but you can't train it, and humor is not appropriate in several situations, and so on. And we also saw that these beliefs against humor were decreasing by the seminar. So quite some evidence. We're just writing the paper forever now, and somehow it will be published in the future. So interventions can work, and there should be more intervention studies actually, because just only trying to find out humor is nice, but if you can do something in the work context, it's even better. I finally come to the conclusion. This is first, maybe this is just important for German contexts, maybe not in African context, but it's worth noting that humor is appropriate in more situations than you will think of, especially in work contexts. Sometimes not, extreme situations, I explained that. Humor can have protective functions in the workplace, also sometimes it doesn't. And there are several boundary conditions and biases that are really, really under-researched and really need more attention. There's a huge gender gap for humor. So if women use the same humor, they're often judged as less competent and the humor is perceived as disruptive. And for men, it's the opposite. Minorities, almost no research about this, because if you have lower status, it's more difficult to use humor in work contexts, and humor is related to power. All these studies ask, even in relationship studies of humor, always just presume everyone is heterosexually oriented. They mostly don't even ask for other sexual orientations. So this is really biased, I think. And also we still ask for, are you men or women? And we are not neglecting so far in research that there are people who just don't feel like men and women, and it should do something to their humor, or it should be very relevant for humor research. Maybe some answers for these gender gaps lie in these diverse gender identities. Intercultural issues, I will say no more because then I would just talk for hours probably. There's so much lack of research on intercultural issues. The humor in organizations research is basically mostly in like European and US context. This is really not really nice. And just as summarized, limitations are many self-assessments, usually cross-sectional, or not usually, but in many cases, and sometimes artificial experiments. And my call would especially be for natural observations. Natural observations make it very difficult, and I know what I'm talking about. I will not explain the next slide. I will just tell you that there is a variance in the target and the perceiver of humor and in the relationship. And we did quite some research about this, and it gets really complicated. I skipped this due to time issues. It's just the future of humor research. I hope that things are also conducted with video observations. So being perceived as funny makes you can enhance sympathy. Brief conclusions for practice. This is also important for work contexts. Manage humor, but don't try to avoid it. You can't anyways. Use positive humor at the right time. Nice saying, right? Aggressive humor is okay, but only if the relationship is of high quality. There's quite some research. And if your status is high, self-defeating humor might be adaptive. Pay attention to misunderstandings, and in the end, of course, we can try to make people more humorous, but overall the organizational culture is determining the rules for humor and communication. So you really have to include the culture. And of course, for yourself, incongruity, do the unexpected. I thank you very much for your attention. If you want to see humor, you have to go to this small town, or rather large village in Germany, Worpswede. That's where the humor is. You see it here. And you also see some of our cooperation partners for doing this research. I thank you very much for your attention, and we'll try. Yeah, here I am.
Okay, wonderful. Tabea, thank you. There's so much. It's
Yes.
almost difficult to take it all in, but there's Jenna and I are generally quite sort of, you know, we kind of step back and think, okay, well, we get a chance to talk to everybody all the time, so we should, you know, not jump in there and ask questions. I've got like 100 that I want to ask you, but this time I'm actually going to let Jenna jump in first, you know, because normally we send her to the back and then she says, oh, I've got so many questions and I didn't get to ask them. So Jenna, I'm going to ask you first, and then we'll go to Abigail and then to Jason. Okay, Jenna. You need to unmute, I think.
I made her speechless.
Yeah.
At a humor conference, one guy came up to me afterwards and said, that was very German.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Oh, you have to give her permission somehow.
Do I have to give her? Oh, goodness me. I'm going to, all right. Let me, apologies, Jenna. Let me see how, what I can do to,
maybe on her picture somehow.
Jenna, ask to unmute. Let's see if that'll work.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, sorry, it's a new setting on Zoom. I'll have to avoid that one.
No problem, it's fine.
Okay.
Okay, let me get to my question now quickly. Prof, I have two questions. The first one's the reversal theory, the telic and the paratelic state. I don't quite understand that. I'd love you to expand on that, because how I understood it was in your telic state, you know, high achievers, goal orientated, get the job done. It's the serious, you know, state of your mind or state you're in. And the paratelic is the more flexible and playful state. So I want to know, does everyone, you know, oscillate between those two states? But would like type A people, you know, go-getters, find jokes for that less humorous because they're more in the telic state, and vice versa? Would people who are whose personality, so has it got a lot to do with personality, like people who are more easygoing and enjoy the journey or the process of life more than, you know, the end result, would their paratelic state be higher? So that's what I'm quite interested in learning about.
Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, everyone is switching between the states, and the older you get, the less you switch. So children are, I don't know, switching 20, 30, 40 times a day. And it's not about like every half an hour I have a switch. Yeah, it's very fluent, and it's very sometimes more often and sometimes less often. Also depends on the situation. I don't know about studies conducted about personality and these reversal theory, because this theory is actually neglected in organizational psychology. Actually, I can imagine, or it would be plausible, that there are persons which are insecure, that really are more in a telic state, because in a paratelic state you are more relaxed, you know. And these so-called type A or goal achievers, they probably have longer periods of the telic state, and more telic state. Doesn't mean that they never experience a paratelic state. Maybe they just hide it or do it in the leisure time or something. So there will be inter-individual differences between persons if you would measure it on a daily basis, but that's also not done. So yes, differences, but everyone is, unless you have some really psychopathological diseases. That's known, that then it's get difficult. You have to unmute her again.
You know what? I'm going to see if I can try to unmute everybody. There we go. Ask all to unmute.
Thanks, Andrea. Sorry, I had to try and type quickly. Thank you so much, Prof. Scheel. And then I just want to ask one more thing, if you can expand on cognitive irritation for me, because it's so fantastic to see quantitative research done on humor. I think it just elevates humor's standing in academia. So it's been really exciting for me to see all of this today. But the cognitive irritation, I understand the affective irritation, but the cognitive I'm not so certain about. So if you could just expand on that for me, please.
We know this from recovery research, for example. If you were just overwhelmed cognitively with your work, you think about your work, you can't really detach, you can't think of anything else, and you just don't get rest. The worst case is when you're lying in bed and you want to fall asleep, but you're just drumming on the problems at work, on the what you expect next day, and so on. So this is really kind of a rumination, actually. So less detachment.
Okay, yes, thank you. That's something I think I suffer from.
Yes, very common in academia.
Yes, yes. Okay. Thanks, Jenna. Abigail, can you unmute yourself? Is this now going to be possible? No. All right. I'm going to press the ask you to unmute. Is that better? Try to unmute now, Abigail. Oh, man. All right, let's try again. Apologies for this.
There we go. There we go.
Yes.
That's very strange. It didn't do this yesterday. I was on Zoom yesterday.
It's something that a setting that I have made incorrectly for this one.
Okay.
Apologies very much for that.
I agree with Jenna's comments about how the quantitative studies just really enhance how you think about humor. When you were talking about clowns and the use of studying clowns in pediatric units and how it lessened anxiety from children going in before surgery, I was just thinking about the vasoconstriction. And that when you're laughing, your body is tensing, and that vasoconstriction, when you're trying to release anxiety, is to that there's actually a constriction in the body that happens with laughter and getting people to laugh, and how just the physical exercise of laughing is releasing the anxiety, which was something I hadn't thought about until you actually started speaking about that specific study. But I know when I went for an operation in June, there was actually a lady who walked around the wards who was a senior nurse who actually went around to try and just get people who are having major surgeries to feel relaxed beforehand. And she told very funny anecdotal stories about herself. And I know for myself, experiencing anxiety before going into the operation, actually having the referral onto her and her stories, and it not be anything about me. I was, after that, laughing. I was laughing. Actually, I was crying so much I was laughing. I immediately felt in my body just that anxiety being released. And just as the getting people to laugh physically is having that release of the buildup of anxiety, that there has to be some sort of lessening of it. But it was great that you had those graphs, and that you had done experiments with the mucus on their mouths. I mean, it's fascinating, really, really, really cool work that you're doing. Thanks, Tabea.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Abigail. And a quick question just before we go to Jason, and it would be a kind of, I think, a follow-up, I'm not sure, but with the telic and the paratelic, that's really wonderful distinction, something interesting. I haven't heard of it before, and I think it's really interesting. But then what about with illness and pain? Can you sort of rise above or beyond illness and pain to get into that paratelic state? I imagine illness and pain are telic. I'm not sure. I mean, where would you place them? Maybe I should ask you.
There isn't, of course, if you are in pain, yeah, it's not that easy to be playful and think of something else. But that's actually a function humor can serve, to distract you from your pain, and then you can be in a telic state or in a paratelic, playful state, although you are in a serious situation or in pain. This is what self-enhancing humor also can do. So, of course, there's more risk to stick into your in your telic state when you have like extreme situations, extreme stress, pain, illness, and so on. And sometimes you have illnesses that really prevent you from going into playful states, like when you have think about schizophrenia, for example. They're just don't mostly. So you have to think of the specific illness, but it's not that it prevents it entirely. I mean, think of people in hospitals, I don't know, and you are laying in bed in these rooms and you start to talk with your neighbor or children or so, they're just laughing. Even children with cancer spend parts of their time laughing, you know. So this is really nothing we can prevent in our lives, fortunately.
Yeah, yes, yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'm trying to connect it back to the previous, one of our previous talks on humor and pain. And yeah, it's, in fact, the speaker came back to me and said, you know, it's a very difficult talk to have had to do, because at this stage he feels like he's in pain and he cannot be humorous. And yet he's talking about the kind of the benefits of humor for pain. But yeah, so it's a very tricky boundary. Yeah, but thank you. Yeah. Jason, I will try to unmute you. Let's ask you to unmute, see if it works.
I think so.
Ah, excellent.
Okay. Thanks, Andrea, and thank you, Tabea. So my question, I hope I have a useful way to frame this, was I was interested in the idea of how much of the function of humor in the workplace is centered on individuals being humorous as opposed to a sort of context of reception for humor. Because I was thinking about it, and there's sort of the challenge of wit is knowing when humor is going too far and when it's appropriate in context. So I was interested in the idea that, you know, someone who tries too hard to be the funny one in the office is almost certainly going to be failing, but there's an accomplishment in learning how to contribute jokes to a general sense of camaraderie where everyone is part of the joke. And I wondered if there's anything in your research that kind of speaks to that.
Thank you for that question. If I understood it right, I try to answer. There is a relation between empathy and the right use of humor, and between social intelligence and the right use of humor. So if you are very skilled in the perception of the other person's state of mind, then it's more easy for you to have the appropriate humor. And of course, even in the humor trainings, it's not about producing clowns or telling you how to try to make jokes. Sometimes it's just something like individually, like use less aggressive humor. Or if you are a woman and blah, 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 and you experience that, just don't try it with humor at that certain, or not with self-defeating humor, for example. So, and if you put together just, I don't know, 5 people, they will start producing humor. And there's a theory about this. This is the, I forgot the name, but it basically says you start with humor, to produce humor as an invitation for the other person. And you start slow if you're smart. And then the other one reciprocates or appreciates your humor. And then you have more humor maybe. And so this is a development, and it can be fast or slow. And this is actually something I'm working on, because humor has some, I don't know, I do humor with everyone. You are usually perceived as funny. And then when we meet, there's a special component because we are just cracking jokes no one else would crack, right? So that's really a distribution of variance in the person, but also in the relationship, and also on the social side. And I don't know, we probably all know teams where there's one humor blocker, you know, one person that's really not humorous, that can really prevent humor. I hope that was kind of an answer.
Yeah, thanks so much. We have a little bit of time left. I'm going to give the last question to Gary. Gary, let me just try to ask you to unmute.
Yeah, I think, can you hear me?
Excellent. Yes. Thank you.
Yeah. Tabea, thank you very much. That's very interesting. Spent a lot of time in corporate myself, so understand the value. I was interested in training, how you train for humor. I mean, you know, how do you measure someone coming in and someone coming out? Are they more funny or less funny? And then just an aside question, whether Mr. Bean is funny in Germany. I'd be interested to know how humor travels, you know.
Yeah, Mr. Bean is funny in Germany. People like Mr. Bean. So people in Germany actually do have humor, and so they find things funny. Well, you always have to explain that. Trainings differ. There is the 7-step manual by McGee or something. I know that there is something done about that. This is about your own coping humor. The 2 days trainings I were talking about is just about raising awareness that there is humor, and then that's okay that there's humor, and then telling people that humor has several functions. And usually people are already very intrigued by the idea that there are different types of humor. And then they come up, now I have an explanation why my boss is just telling the bad joke every day, and why he doesn't stop because he needs a humor feedback. And also about, I don't know, someone saying, okay, I should reduce my self-defeating humor in that circumstance. So the awareness, and maybe this the first idea of how am I using humor in my life? And then of course you can, sometimes this is even enough for people starting to use humor in a different way. And then of course you talk about different contexts, how you could do this, and you start, you create a humorous atmosphere, and you of course can show them techniques like paradoxical interventions or exaggerations. Like if, I don't know, your colleague is starting to complain again, then you try to top him in complaining. Yeah? But yeah, no, oh yes, and the weather, and I don't know, I thought I would drown in this rain, and so on. So there are some approaches, and basically this is, we are not measuring humor, and we are not observing people afterwards, though this would be really nice because the data are hard to get. We're just asking right now for the perceptions of the persons themselves. And it would be, of course, very nice if we could like ask teams for the other team members afterwards, or leaders of the perceptions, or if the leaders, which would be the best, go to the humor trainings, then you can ask the team afterwards, and so on. So this is the approach. It's not about telling jokes or creating humor, and it's not really performative.
Okay, thanks so much. I think we are sadly out of time, but very important and wonderful research that you're doing. You've opened a universe, as always. And so we very much hope that you'll join us at our conference next year and expand on some of the things that you've spoken about here. So yes, thank you very much. I've certainly learned, I must say, as far as humor training goes, is that gallows humor doesn't work for first-year students. I had to learn that by quite, you know.
They're in italic state, they misunderstand.
That was a big mistake. Yes, I should have been on one of your trainings first. Anyway, everyone has to learn by experience too. So thank you very, very much for that. Yes, we'll have to close it off now. And thank you everybody for joining us. We will see you next week. And it's Dr. Alsobrook, and it has to do with, sorry, I'm thinking what it has to do with state capture, I think, and the joke on authority, something very critical theory like. So that I think will be an interesting seminar to attend next week. So thank you all for coming. And Jenna, would you like a quick last word? Oh, I'll have to unmute you, won't I? Oh dear. There you go.
Thanks, Andrea. I just wanted to say thank you so much again, Prof. Scheel. It was mind-blowing, just the quantitative. I think that's what got me so interested today, because all the research I've done and most of the other out there is so qualitative. So it's fantastic and all the detail you've put into it, it's just phenomenal. And we can't wait to have you here next year for the conference. So thank you so much.